Welcome to the Profitable Creatives podcast, where passion meets profitability. I'm Emily Kim, a former Silicon Valley software engineer turned brand photographer and business coach. If you're a creative entrepreneur dreaming of building a business that's as fulfilling as it is profitable, you're in the right place. On this podcast, I'm pulling back the curtain on what it actually takes to run a creative business. We'll talk about how you can bring an engineering mindset to your artistic expertise so that you can build a business you're confident in and love. Let's turn your passion into a thriving creative business and get into the episode. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Profitable Creatives podcast. We have a very exciting first guest today. We have Braden from Not Average Law. Braden is a California licensed attorney and tax professional, and his tagline is your gay best friend here to help you get your legal, tax, and financial shit legit. Braden works primarily with online and creative small business owners through his law firm, the Not Your Average Law Firm, and his online programs and membership. Braden hosts the Unfuck Your Biz podcast and is the author of a book by the same title. I'm so excited to have you here today, Braden. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Excited to be here. I was just thinking, oh my God, that bio sounds so good. I wonder who wrote that.
It does. Yeah. It's a fabulous bio. I was like, wow, we're very fancy here. Okay, so I'm so excited to have you here on the Profitable Creatives podcast as our first guest. I think I found you just through like referrals and also on threads. And my favorite thing about your content, about everything that you put out there, is that you make legal and tax advice fun and super accessible for creatives. So a lot of the listeners are photographers, designers, one-on-one service providers. And whenever I see your content, it's very like matter of fact. This is how it is, not emotionally charged. And I just wanted to ask, what do you see as the biggest legal or tax challenge or challenges that you see with these types of creative business owners?
Okay, before I answer your question about the challenges, I just want to point out that I'm glad you see that in the content. For any of your fans that are Enneagram people, I'm a
Yes.
7 with a hard 8 wing. So the like making things fun, but then the combination of the no bullshit straightforwardness is very on brand for me personally and something that we try to execute like in our brand voice. So that's fabulous. Challenges. Okay, you want to just talk about like tax challenges first and then legal challenges or something like that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, let's start there. So tax challenges, I mean, the main thing is people, they just don't know anything about taxes. And I'm not blaming or shaming anyone. Like, we don't take a tax course in high school. Most of us don't take one in college. Even if you have a business degree, most of us don't take income tax. And law school, even, it was just an elective that I happened to stumble into. So there's no reason why you really would know about this unless you went and proactively sought out information on it. The biggest mistakes, though, are not paying quarterly taxes. As soon as your business starts to make a profit, you need to pay quarterly taxes. And then not having some like very basic bare bones bookkeeping system. And there are nuances to what a quote unquote bookkeeping system actually is, but when I'm talking about it, I'm just really saying like tracking your income and expenses. So when you go to file your taxes, you know how much money your business made and you know how much money you're spent. And then the third aspect of that is knowing like what actually is a business deduction. So that was kind of like 3 big things that people need to be aware of when they start out.
Awesome. And when you say bookkeeping system, are we talking like spreadsheet or something like QuickBooks Zero, Wave?
Yeah, it can be either. My kind of like line in the sand philosophy is that most people really probably shouldn't be on QuickBooks unless they are hiring a bookkeeper. And this is through the past couple years of experience I have. People hire us to manage their QuickBooks and they're like, oh yeah, it's all up to date. It's good to go. And then we get in there and we see that transactions have been misclassified in the wrong categories for 2 years. It's never been reconciled, and we end up having to redo 2 to 3 years worth of bookkeeping. So unless you're like really going to take the time to train yourself on QuickBooks, which may or may not be worth your time, a spreadsheet is actually, in my opinion, the way to go for a lot of new business owners.
I love that because I feel like a lot of people, when you first get into business, they're just like, oh, I feel like I have to be on something like QuickBooks because that's what everybody
Yeah.
does, right? But that's a really good point. So then it prevents you, when you have the spreadsheet, it prevents you from having to go back and do the cleanup because you're just starting fresh, right?
Yeah, you're just tracking it. You can make it pretty simple. I'm also a big proponent of tracking income by categories or by accounts. And It's something that for me was always intuitive because I was not an accounting major, but I took a couple classes. Like I'm somewhat comfortable with numbers, but I'm learning more and more as I work with students that this is not always intuitive. So I can't help myself but ask questions because I'm also a podcaster. But when I say income categories, Emily, like what do you think of? What would be your income categories?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this because I was going to ask what you call them. But for me, that would be dividing up the income that comes in based on the type of service. So I offer photography and videography services, but now I do more um, education. So I have a membership, I have a course coming out, smaller digital products. So I personally like to see, like, line by line, how much is my $7 digital product bringing in versus
Yeah.
this photography mini sessions versus full sessions. So I like to have it very granular.
Yeah, that's perfect. So it kind of depends on A, your organization style and how detailed you like things, and B, how capable you are of managing that. Because you could do it like your income categories could just be 1 photography, 2 videography, 3 courses slash education. But then your photography you could break down into like your 3 different packages or whatever. And then your courses you could break down into every single course offering you have. Or you could do what I do, and I have like low ticket offers as one category because I have like a slew of $10 offers and none of them sell more than like 1 per month. So it just doesn't really make sense to have a column for everything. But obviously, like you and I, we're gonna maybe have 5 to 10 categories of income. A brand new business owner might only have 1 or 2. And then like Target, the corporation, is gonna have like thousands, right? So it varies based on the size of your business and how much you can track. But yeah, your spreadsheet, just a few columns for income, and then you're probably gonna have like about a dozen columns for expenses, and you're gonna total it up that way. Pretty simple.
Okay, got it. And I know for expenses, it makes sense to keep those separate, right? Because that's how you figure out how much you owe in taxes. But income wise, when it is something like photography, videography, and then multiple packages within photography, whatever, is there any, I guess, tax or compliance benefit to having those separate? Or is that more for your own personal record keeping?
Just for your own personal record, when you go to file your taxes, it just asks for income as one line. So it's all gonna get added together anyway. So when you do your breakdown, it's really just gonna be what's for your benefit. And most of the time, like we can go in, whatever your sales platform is, like I use Kajabi. A lot of service providers are gonna send their invoices in Dipsado or Honeybook or whatever. Most of those platforms have an analytics tab where you can go in and see the amount of income you made, like, per offer or per package or per whatever it is that you call it. So, I like to say in your spreadsheet, give yourself maybe more broad categories if you need to lean a particular direction. And then if you're like, "Oh, I made a lot more," like, maybe your primary thing is wedding photography, like, as an example. And maybe at the end of the year, you're like, "Oh, my spreadsheet told me that I made a lot more in, like, other photography services, non-wedding photography services. So now let me go into Honeybook and see, well, how many portrait sessions did I do? And how many, whatever, whatever, whatever." You can go in there to find the more granular details if you need to, hopefully, if it's set up right.
Okay, yeah, I love that because something that I have people do inside my membership is track their time. Because if you have this breakdown of, okay, I'm spending X number of hours in wedding photography, but the wedding photography is not making up the same ratio of hours spent, like maybe we need to reevaluate where are we spending our time, like what's going on in there. So I love that.
That's
Big fan.
something I always love to ask more experienced, photographers and wedding planners, especially. I ask them a lot, about the amount of hours they spend on full service planning versus wedding management, and if they know which one actually has a higher hourly rate. And it's always fascinating to me
Mhm.
because some people will be like, "Well, I charge way more for full service, obviously, but I make more on management because the scope of service is so much smaller." And other people will be like, "No, my signature offer, which is the full management, like I've been doing it, or the full service, I've been doing it for so long, I have it so systematized that I make a lot more money doing it that way." So I always say you want to find your sweet spot. It's kind of like a Venn diagram between the amount you can charge, the amount you're going to profit, and what you enjoy doing the most,
Mhm.
and see how all of that aligns. And when you have the numbers, it empowers you to make those decisions and then pivot in certain directions with what it is that you're marketing and booking.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. I love that. Okay. So that covers taxes. Now let's dive into legal. What are some of the big legal challenges that you see? I feel like legal's a little scarier.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, not having a contract is probably the biggest mistake. That really varies by the industry. I would say probably not as many of your listeners are making that mistake as some of the other industries that we work with, because when you're hiring, for a one-on-one service that's probably $1,000 and up, it's pretty common and accepted to have a contract. But having a shitty contract, that would be another mistake. Other legal mistakes, I mean, there's so many we could go through, right? But let me just reframe it this way. So we teach a concept called the legal layers of protection. It's kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're familiar, where we say the bottom tier is compliance, which is really just making sure that you're not breaking any laws. The next layer is contracts. The next is insurance. And I call those three the absolute essentials for businesses at any level. And then beyond that, we have LLCs and then like IP and trademark stuff. So not having a trademark can be a mistake, but that's less generally applicable to everyone. So I just rattled off about 15 things, and you can kind of choose the direction you want to ask me
Yeah.
about from there.
Yeah. I think the biggest question mark that people who listen to this podcast will have is about like sole proprietor versus LLC versus S-Corp, all of those things. So I don't know. I feel like people give blanket advice on, oh, if you make this much money, then you should be an LLC. Or if you make
Yeah.
this much money, you should be an S-Corp. Are those like, is that real? Is that a real thing?
Not usually. So S corps can be an S corp is it is relevant to how much money you're making for an S corp. Wow, that took me like way too long to get out. The dollar amount you're making is not really relevant for the sole
Hmm.
prop versus LLC kind of thing. So I have a few different analogies I can use to explain this. So the first one, as I say that your business entities are kind of like Pokemon evolutions. Are you a Pokemon fan?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Okay. So I always use Charmander because he's cute, and I feel like everyone that's like your sole prop though. And then your next step, your next evolution is your LLC, and then your third evolution for most business owners is going to be the S corp. Now the only difference is the only the only difference between business entities and Pokemon. That was a crazy thing to say. Um, you get to choose when to evolve your business structure, and you can do it from the outset of your business. So some people may opt to never be a sole prop. They're going to become an LLC immediately. And the reason we do that, I'm going to use another analogy, is because it gives you what I call a magic like bubble of protection. So have you seen The Wizard of Oz? You know how Glinda comes down and that bubble, she like floats
Hmm.
down in a bubble. So I always tell business owners, imagine that your business, like instead of take Glinda out of the bubble, or this gets very morbid, and imagine your business inside the bubble. So that could be like all your camera equipment, if you're a photographer, anything that your business owns is inside the bubble. If someone were to sue you and it literally like imploded your business and your business exploded inside of the bubble, like the bubble is magic and it protects everything on the outside from the shrapnel of that explosion.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this analogy, the bubble is an LLC. Um, if if you do not have any magic bubble, then I want you to picture yourself like holding all of those things. I know,
Got it.
right?
Yeah.
Morbid. Because when you are a sole proprietor, you and your business are one and the same. You are your business is you. There's no separation. So
Hmm.
that's how we have legal liability. And when you form the LLC, it's separate. The business separates itself from you, kind of like a divided cell or something. Talk about mitosis and meiosis is another analogy. Now it's separate. That's why we have our LLC. So another question I'll always ask my students and they get confused because people put this is where you get to the crazy stuff people say on threads and Facebook groups and all that is people will say, "Oh, well, I heard you don't need an LLC until you're making like $30,000." And then my example I always give is, "Well, what if Bill Gates decided that he wanted to start a bungee jumping company tomorrow, but he hasn't like made any money yet? Like should he have an LLC?"
Hmm.
Yeah, because he
Probably.
owns like a ton of personal assets because he's rich, 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 and it's a highly risky business. So that's in a very extreme example.
Okay. That makes so much sense. And that's so straightforward because yeah, I feel like all over Threads or Instagram or wherever, everyone's like, no, 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 you don't have to do this. But I guess like, so let's say you, the random business owner here, decides to start a business, but they had a job previously. They have lots of assets like stock from previous job, and they're married, and all the assets are combined. Definitely should start an LLC, because then otherwise it's all one entity, right? And if someone does your business, then they could
Yeah.
come after the rest of your assets, basically.
Correct, and also
Okay.
to that point, if your business did get sued, but, I mean, you don't really have much in the way of personal assets, someone can still get a judgment against you, which is a legal piece of paper that
Mm,
you owe them money, and that judgment's usually good for at least a few years. So, I always say the only time it wouldn't make sense to have an LLC is if you're broke now and you plan to, like, always be broke. Yeah. Even then, that's a scary proposition. Now, the reality is the likelihood that any of us ever would need to rely on our LLC to protect us is very slim, but it's just
mhm.
like an extra layer of protection.
Yeah,
I feel like I drank a lot of coffee this morning. I explained all that real fast, but hopefully it
I
made
love
sense.
it. No, that's great.
Great.
I talk fast too, so I've already prefaced with like, if you have to listen to this on a slower speed, it's not you, it's me. So it's
Should we
okay.
should we explain the S-Corp now?
Yeah, yeah, please do. I'm going through that
Okay.
right now.
Sorry?
I'm going through that right now. Like I'm
Oh,
some
you're forming your S-Corp? Oh, great. We can,
yes.
like, use you as a case
Oh,
study
great.
then. So, the S-Corp is not an actual type of a legal entity, it's just a tax designation. This is what
Mhm.
confuses people all the time. So, are we essentially gonna choose the way certain business structures are taxed? And there's a few different ways you can track tax businesses under the tax code. So, when we say someone has an S corporation, really what it is they formed an LLC or they formed just a regular corporation, and they've elected for it to be taxed under subchapter S of our tax code, which is just a different mechanism of taxation. And once you do that, we say you have an S corp. I always make the very corny joke that I would prefer that they be called SLLCs because I think that makes a lot more sense. It's like
Mhm.
you form an LLC and then you elect for it to be S taxed, which isn't actually a
That
phrase, but
makes way more
you get,
sense.
yeah, you get the picture, right?
Yeah.
So when you do that, have you already filed your S corp election?
Yes.
Okay, great. Have you heard back from the IRS?
My CPA has, I think.
Oh, great. Okay. A lot of the times they just like never respond, which is really great. Have you put yourself
Awesome.
on payroll yet?
No, that hasn't happened yet.
Okay, so TBD, are they like estimating what your reasonable salary needs to be right now?
I have no idea. I literally filled out the form. I gave the what's it called? The permission slip to my accountant and said, "Please handle this." And
Okay,
now
great.
I'm just like waiting. Maybe we haven't heard from the IRS. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. So you fill out a form. It's called a 2553. That's the name of the IRS form. You mail it in. And a lot of people never hear back or it takes 6 months. So we always tell people just drop it in the mail. And as soon as you mail it, just start treating yourself as an S Corp. It'll be fine.
Mm.
And when you do that, you have to put yourself on payroll. This is a legal requirement. I have to emphasize this very strongly. This is a legal requirement. It's not optional. A lot of people don't know this. They'll have accountants that form their S corp for them, but don't advise them about this, so they never do it, or they do it themselves, like through LegalZoom. They're not aware. They don't put themselves on payroll. This is a big issue, and I'll talk about why in a second. So the way, can I give you a math example? I'm gonna make you do math on your own
Yeah,
podcast.
I'm mathy, so it's good.
Oh, great. Okay, this is gonna be very, very easy math for you
Okay.
then. So, your business makes $100,000 in revenue, and
Mhm.
you're very profitable, so you only have $20,000 in expenses. What is our profit?
The easy answer is
120. It
80.
was 100 minus 20,000.
Wait, so 80,000.
Yeah,
Right, yeah,
80,000 is
okay.
our profit, right? So, if in a sole prop or in just a regular old LLC, you would be taxed on the $80,000 in profit. You pay income tax, those are our tax brackets. And then we also have a 15.3% self-employment tax here in the
Mhm.
US that covers Medicare and Social Security. We're responsible for that whole amount when we're self-employed versus when you have an employer, the employer pays half, you pay half. We don't have that. So income tax and self-employment tax on 80K. You follow so far?
Yes. So should I pull open a calculator?
Yeah, you can. You might
Okay.
need it in a second because
Okay.
that's our sole prop and LLC example. So now we're going to do an S corp example.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
Okay. So now we have, so that's on the left side of our imaginary piece of paper that we can all visualize. If you're a
Mhm.
visual like me, you can visualize it in your brain. On the right side, we're going to do our S-Corp example. So same thing, 100K revenue, 20K expenses, 80K profit. But now we have to pay ourselves a reasonable salary. This is a legal requirement in an S-Corp. That salary must run through payroll. Okay.
Okay.
So I tell you, you hire me and we run a reasonable salary analysis for you. And I tell you, based on your jurisdiction and experience and all that, we think your reasonable salary needs to be $60,000.
Hmm.
Okay, so how much profit is left over in the business now
So that
after
would,
your expenses and salary?
okay, so 100,000 minus 20,000 expenses, that leaves us with 80 minus 60,000 reasonable salary, so 20,000 left in the business.
Yes. Okay, so exactly correct. So now in our S corp, I want people to think about this as a pie chart. So our pie is $100,000. That's our revenue. 20,000 of that piece of pie is expenses. On that amount, we pay no taxes because that's a tax write-off. So
Mhm.
we don't pay any taxes on the 20,000. Our $60,000 in salary, we're going to pay income and self-employment tax on, like we did in the sole prop.
Mhm.
And the reason for this is because that's considered earned income, money that we earned through our labor in the business. And then the $20,000, the third piece of the pie that's left over, we have to pay income tax on that, but we don't pay self-employment tax because it's treated the same way it would be as if we
Mm.
got like a distribution for a large company that we invested in.
Okay.
So we save, in other words, to put this very simply, we save 15.3% self-employment tax on that $20,000.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is roughly 3 grand in tax savings.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask you like a more analytical question now.
Okay.
What would you want to do to your salary to increase your tax savings?
Pay myself less?
Yeah, pay
Yeah,
yourself
okay.
less. So
Uh-huh.
if we had 100K revenue, 20K expenses, and then instead of a 60K salary, we paid a 40K salary. Now we have 40K profit and we save 15.3% on 40K profit, which would be a $6,000 savings.
Mhm.
So we lower our salary by 20,000 and we double our tax savings. Now, this is where the reasonable salary comes in because the
Mhm.
logical question is always then, well, why don't I just pay myself a $10,000 salary? The law requires that our salary be reasonable, and that's where we have to, do a little bit of research into what a reasonable salary would be. Um, and I mentioned earlier why it's problematic if people don't get on payroll, and the reason why is because if you never pay yourself through payroll, you've effectively paid yourself a $0 salary,
I see.
which means you pay $0 in self-employment tax, which is essentially like an automatic audit waiting to happen. And then they're going to charge you
Awesome.
all the self-employment tax plus the interest and the penalties.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay. That is a really simple explanation that I don't even think I got from my accountant when I was asking about this.
Yeah.
Um, okay, that's super
And
great. I
this
think go ahead.
Yeah, this is why selfishly, this is why I'm such a fan of my own book, Pat Myself on My Back, and my
Yeah.
course. And
Yeah.
it's because I've explained that at least a couple hundred times at this point, which is why I'm able to do it, I think, somewhat succinctly. But also it's like I can't explain that on every single one-on-one call that I meet with clients on, but that's why I'm usually encouraging people like buy the book, listen to the book, and then you can come to me with all of the follow-up questions, right?
Right.
Rather than the basic questions. So even if your audience doesn't want to hire me to do their stuff, which is fine, but they can if they want to,
Mhm.
um, they can, we're going to talk about all the resources later, but they can dig into the resources and then they'll be able to have a better conversation with their tax professional about all this
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay, that's great. Well, because you mentioned it, let's talk about the book now, because I know you
Sure.
have a book, you have varying levels of service, but we'll start with the book. Tell me
Yeah.
what led you to want to write it, first of all?
I mean, who doesn't want to write a book? I mean,
True.
maybe a lot of people don't want to write a book, but since I was a little kid, to me, it was kind of like the peak. It was like the peak of personal achievement, like writing, because when we're in elementary school, like writing a one-page handwritten essay that's wild,
Mhm.
unfathomable, but we have to do it. And then so I'm like a multi-100-page book. Who could ever do that? So it was aspirational as a child, but eventually the pieces all came together because I came up with the Unfuck Your Biz framework when I was
Mhm.
at a mastermind retreat in 2018, we came up with the name Unfuck Your Biz, which ended up becoming my podcast name. And then I created the framework. And then it's just so happened that one of the women in my mastermind is a book coach. She's still in my mastermind now, 6 years later. We're all good friends. And we outlined the book in beginning of 2020. I had a lot of time at
Mhm.
home that year.
Oh,
So
same.
yeah, I wrote it, self-published it, and it's been selling the 2 to 3 copies a month ever since.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Sometimes more. Yeah, usually I take, like, 100 copies with me when I go do, like, stage speaking engagements and stuff, and we'll sell a bunch then too.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. Okay, so that's the book. That's like the entry level way of how we can unfuck our own businesses. So
Yes.
what do you have back up? How else can people work with you?
So we do all of our tax and business entity stuff. So helping people with their taxes, setting up the LLCs, the S-Corps. We've dabbled with doing that as one-off stuff before, but now it's all done really with inside the Unfuck Your Biz framework.
Mhm.
And we deliver that 3 ways. The book is the first one. The second is our group coaching program, which we open a couple times a year. And then we also more targeted to multi-six-figure business owners, but open to anyone and everyone is our signature one-on-one service, which we have a setup fee for that. And then it's a $750 a month service, which is basically like your all-in-one lawyer, accountant, bookkeeper service.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I've snooped your sales page like a million times, so
Oh, good.
I know a lot about it. um, but another thing kind of along the lines that I wanted to ask about. So I used to be based in California. I moved to Massachusetts. Now I'm based in Massachusetts. And something that I saw you post on Threads the other day was how people are always looking for like, oh, is there a tax and legal expert local to blah, 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 whatever city
Yeah.
that they live in. Do you have to have a local person for this kind of stuff?
No. So legal is kind of a different situation. So we'll talk about the tax first. But I was because that post in particular was I always see people post looking for a CPA in Dallas, Texas. And in my mind, I'm always kinda, like, eye rolling because, I'm like, "I'm not in Dallas, come work with me," right? I think we all kinda have that. Um, but also, I'm like, do people want to go, like, meet with their do you want to go into, like, the strip mall office of your tax professional to, like, sit down at their messy desk to talk about your taxes? Or do you just wanna, like, have a Zoom call with Braden or someone else that's cool and fun and upload everything into a Google Drive folder? So, no, tax people don't have to be local. If you have reasons for wanting a local person, I actually kinda like meeting with people locally, so I'm, being a little bit of a hypocrite here, but,
Mhm.
if you're really into that, that's totally fine. But taxes, for the most part, the IRS is the biggest tax question mark. That's all federal, and then most states really just fall in line with whatever the federal rules are anyway. Legal can be a little bit different because there are some legal things that are federally based and some that are state based, but for the most part, um, for the most part, the majority of the stuff that we do is pretty generally applicable across all states from a legal perspective. And there's a handful of scenarios where we're like, okay, you need to go find someone licensed in your state who can help you with this specific issue.
Okay, got it. That's good to know. So, very generally speaking, tax stuff, you're good with someone. It's not state specific, but legal can be dependent based on what you need.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if it's like we're gonna talk about contract templates, I think, but for the most
Mhm.
part, I mean, the laws on what you can do regarding your client contract, there's like a couple of nuances that vary by state, but for the most part, you just err on the side of doing like what's legal in all 50 states anyway, so it doesn't really matter. LLCs, I mean, the benefit of LLCs are the same in every single state. Sometimes the form that you have to fill out is just a little bit different, but pretty easy for us to help with that. Trademarks are federal law. One example, I just had a friend of mine message me this morning and they have a business partner and they wanna buy another business and they don't wanna do like a 50-50 partnership
Mm.
share, they wanna do something different, and that all falls under, like, the state partnership code of whatever state they're in. So in that specific example, I was like, go hire a local business attorney that's licensed in the state where your business entity is formed.
Okay, okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I generally like meeting people in person, but when it comes to this stuff, I feel like I'm like worst case scenario, I can barge into someone's office and be like, "Help, everything's on fire." I feel like that's like
Yeah.
the only reason why I would want someone local. But then if you're hiring someone, the idea is that you never have to barge into someone's office and
Yeah.
say, "Help,
And
it's all
our
on
like
fire."
our general pitch, especially when it comes to contracts, but a lot of other stuff as well, is that oftentimes you're better served hiring someone that's highly familiar with your industry than someone
Yeah,
that's local to you. Because, like, imagine trying to explain your like photography and some creative services are a lot easier because people outside of the industry like understands what a photographer does, although they might not understand like your pricing and like why you actually charge money for it and how expensive your equipment is.
Mhm.
But this like online course stuff that you and I do, like imagine talking to your family members about it and they're like, I don't
Oh,
really get it.
yeah,
I
they
was
have no
telling
idea.
someone, I was telling a friend at my gym yesterday that I was going to the Kajabi conference tomorrow, and they were like, "What is that?" They thought I was going to hang out with like other lawyers, and I said, "No, it's course creators." And they said, like, they're like, "With like college curriculum? I don't get it." I was like, "No." I said, and I was like, "They're all my ideal clients. That's why I go. It's why." But the point I'm making here is that most people don't really understand what you do in business, and most
Mhm.
lawyers are going to be the exact same way. And it's really hard for lawyers to write your contracts if they don't understand the ins and outs of your business. Because how are they going to know what to put in the contract if they don't understand all this stuff? So,
Yeah.
like, go talk to a local lawyer, and they're not going to know that you should have a paragraph in your contract that says that like you can't just feed me lunch meat sandwiches in the middle of the 12-hour shift I'm working at your wedding, right? They would never think.
Yeah.
And obviously we do because we worked with hundreds of photographers at this point.
Yeah, yeah, oh my gosh, that is contentious in the photography Facebook groups, the
I know.
vendor
And that's just
meals.
one, one example of like dozens and dozens that we could. I mean, we all like after all the sepia bride stuff, you came on my
Mhm.
podcast to talk
Yeah.
about that. We're like, do we need to put anything in our contract to address this? And it's like, well, not really, because we already have clauses on artistic license and that my portfolio is representative of my work and that the client understands this. All stuff that, again, a lawyer probably wouldn't think of to address if they didn't already have a base of clients in that field.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I love that you mentioned contracts. Let's talk about the contract club. So, a question that I get probably a couple of times a month is, Emily, where do you get your contracts from? And I used to recommend like these one-off photography contracts, but the problem with that is, okay, here's a contract for wedding photography. Here's a contract for portrait photography. They're all like $500 a piece. And then on
Uh-huh.
top of that, you have to go hire a lawyer to customize it. And then I stumbled upon the contract club. And ever since then, I have been screaming it from the rooftops. A handful of people in my membership have gotten it, and they're just like, well, why haven't I heard about this beforehand? So tell us about the contract club and what it is and why it's different from standalone contract templates.
Sure. So glad you asked. The contract club is the best thing I've ever created. We have over 2,300 members at this point, which is phenomenal. Biggest misconception is that we call it a club, but it's a one-time payment. So although you're like a member for the life of the program, you only pay once. But it really just started out as a bank of contract templates. It started out as a course called Unfuck Your Contracts, and I used to sell contracts by the template, and it was just a pain. I'd sell like one a month, and I'm like, great, that's $250. One person got their contract, but it was a whole store of templates. It was a pain in the ass to manage. And then I put them all inside of a course called Unfuck Your Contracts. That was like a whole brand of mine. I had like the unf, each different kind of category.
Mhm.
And turns out no one really wants to take a course on contracts. People aren't interested. Imagine that. But what it really was, it was a collection of templates, and each template has a video to show you how to customize it. And so really I just renamed it and I rebranded it, and then we called it the Contract Club, and it's a bank of contract templates that you can access. And oh, by the way, it's technically a course if you actually want to go through it, but we don't market it that way.
Mhm.
And what we found is that people love it because it's $50 and they get dozens of contracts, like contracts they didn't even know that they needed. And then hopefully they do watch the videos and they find those incredibly valuable because that teaches you essentially, I call it build a bear, but with contracts. So we say we have a video on payment terms, and then you open a Google Doc and it has flat fee retainer, percentage-based retainer, multiple payments, monthly payments, all the different kinds of payment terms you can imagine, and then we just walk you through how to appropriately add that to your template, and then you go to the next video on the next part of the contract, and you're basically custom piecing your contract together throughout the process.
Yeah, I have gone through I think one day I just sat down for maybe a couple of hours because it didn't take me long to build it out and go through it. And I watched all the videos, and I feel like I finally understand what my contract says versus
Good.
previously. I went through it and I hired a lawyer to walk through it and customize it with me, but I was still just like, I don't understand what these are for. And they were like, It's fine. Just come back when you need this updated."
Yeah,
And I'm
we
like,
need to
but what
change
if
it.
I want something different now? Because sometimes people need payment plans, sometimes they don't. So I love that you have the clauses just available for me to swap if I need to. It's just a very easy, simple thing to do. And I just love the setup of it. I will have the link in the show notes to all of Braden's things, but I'll
Good,
separate
good,
out the
good.
contract club too, because I am obsessed with it and
Yeah,
everybody should have it.
what we'll usually recommend is, like, you make your primary template first for, like, your number 1 service, and then you duplicate it, and then you go make all your other templates. Because you might have, you might have package A, package B, package C, so that's 3 contract templates, but then maybe in an ideal scenario, like, your package A people, your highest package they pay you in 2 payments. They pay you a deposit, and then they pay you a second payment, but occasionally you get, like, a dream client who seems lovely, and they ask if you could do 6 payments, and you're like, "Normally, I wouldn't, but this well, I'll use weddings again. This wedding's gonna look perfect in my portfolio, and they seem so nice, and they seem so lovely," so then you wanna have a contract template for that, right? And that's how
Mhm.
you can kinda break it up.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, amazing. So, in line with that, circling back to other ways to work with you, I know before we started, you mentioned that you have something coming out in the next couple of weeks. Tell us. Tell us
I feel
everything.
like we're gonna overwhelm your people because 'cause you're promoting, like, 7 different things to them, but,
That's fine.
hopefully they
They'll
follow it. Join the contract club for sure. Get the
Mhm.
book if it sounds appealing to you, but the new thing we're launching, it's gonna be called the Not Average newsletter, and it's rolling out the week of Wedding MBA 'cause we'll be speaking there, and I have a booth there, so we figured why not launch it in. I think November 11th, I wanna say, is the first day. It's whatever that
Mhm.
Monday is. That's when it'll be launching. But it's a $10 a month membership, and essentially our goal there's a lot of new laws that came out this year that apply to
Right.
new business owners. Laws on non-competes are pending right now. We had the BOI filings that came out. We have new rules on disclosures around recurring payments, a whole bunch of stuff. Independent contractor laws and hiring laws are changing all the time. So we track all of that, and then the idea is once a month we send you a compliance update. It's just basically looks like a blog post, but you get an email as well with any key changes that you need to know about, as long as upcoming tax deadlines. And then you can submit questions if you have any, and I record a private podcast that's available to members only. So it's a really great the goal is to make it like a really great entry point for people who don't have like their own on-demand lawyer just yet, but
Mhm.
just want to make sure that for $10 a month, they're not, totally missing the boat on some potential emerging legal and tax issues.
Yeah, that is so cool. And I love that you have all of these accessible options, like with the contract club, you have your book, all of these ways that you're taking care of people without having to immediately shell out, thousands and thousands of dollars because a lot of people aren't ready for that yet. Well, no, let me back up. I feel like if you're going to invest in something, this is the thing that you should invest in.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I love that you have all of these entry points for people
Yeah,
and
a lot
make
of
it
people, like,
easy.
aren't necessarily ready for one-on-one work, and even if you could afford it, like, the when we do take people straight into one-on-one, it's usually they're leaving, like, corporate and they've saved up a
Mm,
lot of money, or, like, I had an intake call with a lawyer the other day who was leaving their law firm and taking their whole book of business with them into their new business,
mm,
and they
mm.
did something totally irrelevant to what we do, so they still needed our support. Unless you're in one of those situations, like, even if you could hire us, um your bookkeeping is gonna be like 4 transactions, if you, like, don't have
Yeah,
clients yet, right? So, you would be paying us to do not that much work, so it's super helpful to at least learn the basics early on so you can manage, like, self-manage up to a certain point, and that's our goal, to help people do
for
that stuff.
sure. Yeah, I love it. Okay, well, Brayden, tell us where we can find you. Where do you like to hang out online?
Yeah, so Not Average Law is the business name. We abbreviate average AVG, so Not AVG Law on Threads and Instagram, TikTok. You can find me Braden Drake, but if you put Not AVG Law, you'll probably find me there too. Make sure you subscribe to the Unfuck Your Biz with Braden podcast. Asterisk for the
Mhm.
U. That if people needed like 2 takeaways, I would say subscribe to the podcast and join the contract club.
Awesome. That will all be linked in the show notes for everyone listening to Great Place to Start. Thank you so much for being here on the Profitable Creatives podcast. I love this conversation and I love how easy and like approachable you make it. I don't feel like that impending dread that I usually do when I think about these things. So that's
Good.
great.
That's the goal. Love it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Until next time.